Thank you. The final item of business is a members' business debate on motion 20306 in the name of Sandra White on Alasdair Gray, a creative force. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put. Those members who wish to speak in the debate, press the request to speak buttons now. And I call on Sandra White to open the debate. Ms White, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, today we've come together to pay tribute to the life and works of Alasdair Gray. I would like to thank members for the support of my motion and also take the opportunity to thank those representing Alasdair who are joining us for this debate this evening in the public gallery. Francis Bickmore, Alasdair's publisher, Jenny Brown, Alasdair's agent, and Claire Forsyth from the Glasgow print studio, who Alasdair worked with for many, many years. I've also received messages of support from Alasdair's sister Maura Rowley, and his niece Kat Rowley. Unfortunately, they were not able to attend this evening, but we're very touched to know that this motion will be brought to the Chamber for debate. It's difficult to fit a whole life's work into a few minutes speech. However, I shall do my best, and I hope that we can share and celebrate Alasdair and his incredible cultural achievements, as well as raising how we can safeguard that legacy for future generations. Alasdair Gray was born in Ridley in Glasgow in 1934. Trained as a painter at the Glasgow School of Art, he worked as a part-time art teacher, muralist and theatrical screen painter before becoming a full-time painter, playwright and author. His highly acclaimed first novel, Lanark, was published in 1981, winning both a Scottish Arts Council Book Award and the Scottish Book of the Year Award. It was followed by more than 30 further books, all of which he designed and illustrated, ranging from novels, short story collections, plays, volumes of poetry, work of non-fiction and translations, as well as his visual art book of A Life in Pictures, of which he also won an award. His most recent piece of work was the interpretation of Dante's Divine Trilogy. In November 2019, the month before he passed away, Alasdair won the inaugural Saltire Society Lifetime Achievement Award for his contribution to Scottish literature. His public murals are visible across Glasgow. Further examples of his work are displayed in galleries from the V&A to the Scottish National Gallery of Modern Art, as well as universities and public libraries. Glasgow was where Alasdair lived and worked for most of his life, embedded in the later years in the West End of Glasgow, and can often be seen going up and down Byres Road, Partick and various other areas within the West End as well. It was a great pleasure to bump into him in the streets in that area. And it was in this area, in the studio in Alasdair's house, that I had the incredible opportunity to be immortalised, if that's the correct word, by Alasdair in his wonderful mural at Hillhead subway station. It was an honour to be included in one of his many artworks, and I do really fondly remember the sittings at his house and the great chats we had about Glasgow and, of course, politics as well. Now, politics aside, or here in this chamber, I'm reminded of two books Alasdair wrote, the first in 1992, Why Scots Should Rule Scotland, and a follow-up co-authored by Adam Tompkins, MSP, in 2005, How Should We Rule Ourselves? The latter parting note reading what we need is a parliament without whips and a constitution without the crown. Now, radical or rascal, perhaps he was a bit of both, and I'm sure Mr Tompkins will refer to that also. There's also a claim to fame in the Parliament as well, that Alasdair stood as rector for Glasgow University very early on, and the person who helped him there and put forward that is now a minister in this Parliament, and that was Jamie Hepburn. And I don't know if Jamie's here today or not. However, after a serious fall in 2015, Alasdair was unable to walk and was confined to a wheelchair. However, it didn't deter him. He continued to create and produce right up to the very end, working with the Glasgow print studio, which he had a relationship spanning, as I mentioned before, decades. He was delighted when the director of the Glasgow print studio, John McKechnie, invited Alasdair to hold an exhibition this year. The exhibition will consist of the many prints Alasdair made with GPS over the last 30 years, and was to be the launch event for several new screen prints that they produced with Alasdair in the last 18 months. It is incredibly sad that he did not get to see his work displayed at an institution he had been such a huge part of over many years, but we can all go and visit that exhibition. So the question I want to ask is, what can we do to safeguard this incredible legacy? What would be a fitting tribute to such a creative individual? Francis Bickmore, Alasdair's publisher, has said the strongest message of Alasdair Gray's work is the understanding that culture, especially literature and art, offers essential building blocks with which to forge a nation. Through his books from Lanark onwards, his paintings, murals, poetry and plays, and the many other artists and paintings and writers he supported, Alasdair helped to create the modern Scottish imagination. He helped foster community and he helped to unlock our sense of the possible. Now seems like the perfect time to commemorate him in a foundation or a literary fund to support emerging or struggling artists who do the same. And I'm incredibly supportive of the establishment of such a fund, and I do hope this can be taken forward. I would also champion the proposal of a mural here in the Scottish Parliament, which Alasdair's assistant Nick Wheatley had been working on. This would sit really well with his words, which are engraved on this Parliament building. As well as his suggestions, I would also like to take the opportunity to highlight the work undertaken by Saoirse Dallas, Alasdair's friend and gallerist, who has a responsibility of taking forward the Alasdair Gray archive. Saoirse has, I think, her work cut out. Alasdair was a key Scottish figure, and his archive is of national and international significance, and I believe that support should be provided to the Alasdair Gray archive. And can I now take this opportunity to ask the Cabinet Secretary if she would meet and discuss what support the Scottish Government can offer to the ideas which I've just mentioned. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, Alasdair will be mourned by everyone he touched. His family said following his death, Alasdair was an extraordinary person, very talented, and even more importantly, very humane. He was unique and irreplaceable, and we will miss him greatly. His niece said, the most important lesson I learned from Alasdair was humanity. He talked to everyone as an equal, and he valued everyone's contribution. Claire Forsyth from the GPS said, Alasdair lived his life looking, reflecting, reworking, not settling, challenging and innovating. Protesting that it might be easier to remain silent, it's in his spirit that lives on in the tenet of one of his final screen prints. Work as if you were in the early days of a better nation. The legacy of a man driven by creativity and political engagement. We are incredibly fortunate to have had such a formidable, creative force who I had the pleasure to know, as had many others, and his legacy, I'm sure, will live on. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Ms White. I call Claire Adamson, who will followed by Annie Wells. Ms Adamson, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would like to start by thanking and congratulating Sandra White for bringing this motion to the Chamber. Scotland and the world has lost a cultural icon, and it is fitting that we recognise him in our national parliament. As Sandra said, how does one begin to capture the essence of Alasdair Gray in a short speech? When you're talking of a literary and artistic giant, a polymath who influenced a generation of Scottish culture, then compiling that into a short speech seems just a task I'm not worthy of. A life in 4 books would be more appropriate, but you'll be relieved that I'm not starting my speech on page 3. Perhaps I'll borrow one of Alasdair's techniques and elaborate in my footnotes. You simply need to look at the outpouring of tributes following his death to see what a profound and lasting impact Alasdair Gray had on contemporary Scotland. He lived in Glasgow for most of his life, and indeed much of his work is based around the city, and his global credentials are a testament to the common humanity of his works. His writing and his art captures something that is intrinsically appealing to people across the world. The wonderful Ian Rankin summarised this very nicely. A big part of Alasdair Gray's genius was making Scots life interesting on the international stage. And Rankin said he could take something very personal to him, his background growing up in Glasgow, and make it that people around the world wanted to read it. He was at the forefront of a palpable revival in Scottish literature in the 1980s. Lanark, arguably Alasdair Gray's most enduring masterpiece. I remember when Lanark was released, I was 14 years old, and my brothers and sisters, who are a bit older than me, decided that would be a good present for my dad that Christmas. And I was fascinated by it. It was a work named after my home county, And it was also the graphic design on the cover was so iconic, so unusual. It captured my imagination. It was a few more years before I was able to read both Lanark and some of the works of James Kelman. I can't say enjoyed them, not the way I enjoyed science fiction and fantasy novels, which I had been reading up till that point. They were serious, grown-up books, challenging, sometimes bleak, but I loved them nonetheless. I want to finish, Presiding Officer, by my personal memories of Alasdair Gray. Along with my former colleague, Rob Gibson, we were founder members of the Cunningham-Graham Society in Scotland, and it was a society that was supported by Alasdair, and indeed I'm sure he gave one of the speeches or readings at one of our dinners, but one in particular I remember in Babbitty Bowsters in Glasgow, and Alasdair was on the top table and Billy Kay was giving the address to the group. And Alasdair, feeling a bit tired, maybe a bit weary, or maybe just concentrating very hard on what Billy Kay had to say, snuggled into the shoulder of Maria Jo Kay, Billy's lovely wife, and just had a little sleep, we think. And, we say that you talk about national treasures and say, oh, that's it. And I know he would hate to be called that, but nonetheless, only a national treasure, I think, would have got away with that on that evening. And it was Billy who reminded me of that in his tribute on Twitter to Alasdair. He's so much loved, has contributed so much to our culture, to our experiences. I'll never forget my first visit to the ubiquitous Chip and seeing his murals there, or indeed the Oran Moor, seeing that wonderful quotation, not coined by Alasdair, but nonetheless used by him, about living as if we were in the early days of a better nation, and what an inspiration and what a loss to our country. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Ms Baker. I call Annie Wells, to be followed by Claire Baker.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I'd like to thank Sandra White for bringing this motion and debate forward to recognise the life of Alasdair Gray. Alasdair Gray held different political beliefs, and as we've heard, he fostered interesting intellectual dialogue in his time. But what I want to focus on is celebrating the life of Glasgow and Scotland's finest creatives of the recent past. Anthony Burgess, the author of A Clockwork Orange, went as far to say that Alasdair Gray is the most important Scottish novelist since Sir Walter Scott. Indeed, his work as an author was an inspiration to many Scottish authors who came after him. He blazed a trail that many others followed. It's even more inspiring that his first novel wasn't published until he was 46 years old. We can't all become world-famous authors at 46, but he certainly showed that age is no barrier. Lanark was obviously worth the wait, since it became his most famous work. Of course, he was an artist first, launching his career, as so many others have done, from the Glasgow School of Art. Across my region of Glasgow, his work lives on in various well-kent places, in Ashton Lane, as we've heard, and the mural that Sandra White was describing at Hillhead subway station. Sandra White's motion references a number of his works, but it's testament to his drive and sheer creativity that there are so many others that could have been included. Everyone will have a different reason for celebrating his work, but mine is simple. What strikes me most about Alasdair Gray is this: his love of Glasgow and its people shines through his work. And it's probably the most overwhelming aspect of his body of work throughout his career. He wore his roots as a badge of pride. He involved the ordinary working people of Glasgow and Scotland in his work wherever possible. There are few Scots who can claim to have contributed to our cultural life on the scale that Alasdair Gray did. He will be remembered as a pioneer. His reach went far beyond the East End of Glasgow and Scotland. He will be sorely missed, and we can only hope his passing highlights his work to another generation of Scottish creatives. Who will in turn be inspired, as many others have, before Alasdair Gray's work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call Claire Baker, to be followed by Patrick Harvie. Ms Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome this afternoon's debate and congratulate Sandra White on securing the time. It is appropriate that we have this debate to mark the achievements of Alasdair Gray and his significant contribution to Scottish culture. The extent of the commentary on his death demonstrates the high esteem in which his work is held, the inspiration he provided for a generation of Scottish writers, and the recognition of his talent, which is evident in public buildings throughout Scotland. Work as if you live in the early days of a better nation. These words are among the inscriptions on the Cannon Gate wall here at the Parliament. The inclusion of Alasdair Gray, a significant expression of Scottish identity and aspiration. In true postmodernist fashion, Alasdair Gray borrowed the phrase from a Canadian poet in Dennis Lee's Elegies Toronto and Nancy, which he said, and best of all is finding a place to be in the early days of a better civilization. And Alasdair Gray reshaped it to describe a new circumstance in Scotland. Alasdair Gray is rightly acknowledged as one of the most innovative figures in contemporary literature and culture. The diversity of his creative talent means he leaves a legacy of novels, poems, murals, portraits, scripts, illustrations, short stories and other work. Success may have come later in life, with Lanark not published until he was 46, but he undoubtedly finished his career as one of Scotland's most loved artists. I first read Alasdair Gray when I was a PhD student at Glasgow University. Studying Sylvia Plath, I'd always focused on American literature, and so reading Alasdair Gray's novel Poor Things, which I was tutoring along with first years, was a delight. It is innovative, imaginative, witty and perceptive. Published in 1992, it was described as a magnificently brisk, funny, dirty, brainy book by the London Review of Books. A departure from Glasgow, it still addressed themes of social inequality, relationships, memory and identity. The combination of text and illustration is immersive and demonstrates the quality of his writing and his art. The many tributes which followed his death highlighted not only his creative influence, but his humanity, his compassion and his vision. He was central to a renaissance in Scottish literature, inspiring and supporting a generation of writers. The motion rightly highlights some of his most well-known murals in Glasgow, including at Hillhead Station and the ubiquitous Chip Restaurant. While his artwork has been widely exhibited and included in several collections, the presence of public works such as his murals is invaluable. There is a generosity in his work. Many people will be familiar with his work, will enjoy it and respond to it. His work is very egalitarian. The Alasdair Gray Archive at the National Library has a wonderful collection of the original artwork, as well as handwritten manuscripts, correspondence relating to his novels, notebooks he used to record ideas, and drafts, as well as diary entries. And I support the proposals made by Sandra White this evening being explored. In 1995, he was commissioned to create a ceiling mural for the upper gallery of Abbott House in Dunfermline. His Thistle of Dunfermline's history depicts the timeline of the town in the form of a tree of life with branches dividing the centuries. Abbott House is due to reopen soon following a renovation, and I look forward to revisiting this work. Alasdair Gray returned to Abbott House as part of the anniversary celebrations in 2015 to speak about his mural. He also gave talks to local art pupils from the 4 Dunfermline high schools, reflecting his generosity of spirit and his background in teaching. Alasdair Gray did not die a wealthy man. At the height of his career, he said, "I am a well-known writer who cannot make a living from his writing." Critically acclaimed, in recent years he had to apply for support from the Scottish Artists Benevolent Fund. However, his talent, imagination and creativity has bestowed riches upon the people of Scotland and the world, and he will be sorely missed.
Thank you very much. I call Patrick Harvie to be followed by Tom Arthur. Mr Harvie, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Just thinking about some of the words that we've already heard this evening: formidable, inspirational, irreplaceable, unique, humane, loved. I'm not really sure that there's a higher aspiration for a human life than to be remembered with those words, but I think they're all clearly, sincerely meant. And so I'm very grateful for this opportunity to speak in the debate, and I would echo the thanks to Sandra White for bringing the motion. In an interview in his later years, Alasdair Gray described his art as documentary work, in as much as Dickens documented London and Dostoevsky documented Moscow and St. Petersburg. I don't think we can be in any doubt that future generations will look back on his extensive collection of novels, short stories, poems, paintings, murals and illustrations to see a treasure trove documenting Glasgow in particular, and all its characters, its stories, its hopes and aspirations. One of the reasons his art has been taken to the city's heart is because public murals and paperback books are accessible and affordable. The cost of a subway ticket or a pint in the pub, or even the free loan of a book from a public library. Gray has given daily life in Glasgow not just a visual language, but a whole mythology. The epic narrative of Lanark showed us that every aspect of life and death was being played out right here, every day. The Glasgow version is every bit as valid as ancient Greek poetry or Renaissance masterpieces. He gave us vivid characters like Bella Baxter in Poor Things, who can be read as a reworking of the Frankenstein myth or as a contemporary allegory for a modern Scotland, beautiful but disjointed and not in control of her bodily autonomy. And Lanark gave us a vision of municipalism, good and bad. And Gray often spoke about that in his non-fiction works also. He was a committed believer in local control and local decision-making, and he often spoke passionately about the importance of public libraries, the public library in Ridley, and Miss Jean Irwin's art classes at Kelvin Grove Public Gallery, which he attended on Saturday mornings throughout his childhood. He spoke also of the importance of his first regular paid work as artist recorder at the People's Palace in the late 70s and the opportunities afforded to him to refine his skills as a documentary artist. This was supported through the government's job creation scheme at a time when society valued the role of local artists and was prepared to pay for it through the public purse. Alasdair Gray wouldn't have been the artist he was without the opportunities offered to him by the city's public institutions. And Glasgow would not be the same city it is without Alasdair Gray's unique, playful and ambitious contributions to the city. It was his people-focused approach that made it so natural for Gray's work to cross over into political contributions too. He saw his role as artist to hold a mirror up to ourselves and help us see both the best and worst of our personalities and our communities. As a supporter of independence, he was always keen to emphasise that political autonomy is meaningless if we don't use it to benefit the pursuit of equality and social justice. I'll mention the two documents, the two publications that Sandra White did as well. The 2005 pamphlet, How We Should Rule Ourselves, warned politicians like us, sovereignty belongs to the citizens of a nation. There should be no political or legal authority superior to the people. Government is for the benefit of the people, not the other way around. We the people lend power to a government in order to help ourselves. Power is not the government's to keep. I suppose we're all left guessing as to which of the great minds involved contributed most to that particular sentiment. But Gray's earlier publication, Why the Scots Should Rule Scotland, summed up perfectly for me the role that art and culture has to play in building a healthy, participatory vision of a country. In it, he said, a truly independent Scotland will only ever exist when people in every home, school, croft, farm, workshop, factory, island, glen, town and city feel that they too are at the centre of the world. That's what Alasdair Gray's art did for us. He put people at the centre of a visual and literary world. We have much to learn from him. He'll be sorely missed.
Thank you very much. I call Tom Arthur to be followed by Adam Tompkins. Mr. Arthur, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to begin by thanking my colleague Sandra White for securing this evening's members' debate. Unlike Sandra White and indeed Claire Adams, I did not know Alasdair Gray personally, but I am fortunate to know two individuals who did and who worked with him closely, and I'm very grateful to both of them, Dr. Roger Glass and our mutual friend Mark Buckland, for their help in preparing these remarks that I'm about to deliver. Presiding Officer, for 7 decades, Alasdair Gray worked furiously across space and form, transforming the artistic landscape of the country. He documented his home city of Glasgow as it disappeared and reappeared, almost as one of his imagined objects in all its vibrancy. He charted Glasgow's changes with compassion, training his focus on the marginalised and the forgotten. So successful was Gray in his endeavour that the famed restriction from Lanark that not even the inhabitants of Glasgow live there imaginatively has been ironically but pleasingly rendered obsolete by his own reimagining of the city and his ability to project the interior life of its inhabitants. His achievements were born of a lifetime of perseverance. Having scribbled in teenage diaries an imaginary shelf of books he wished to create, Gray steadfastly made that shelf a reality, producing work that changed Scotland, the way it sees itself, and the ways it looks to the future. Though some believe he belongs to Scotland, for me his works know no boundaries or borders. As Patrick Harvie acknowledged, Gray argued he was merely doing the same as Dickens with London or Dostoevsky with St. Petersburg, using the local to approach the universal, asserting Scotland's legitimacy in the process. We have rightly heard much praise for Alasdair Gray's work today, but praise of the dead must also be accompanied by reflection. By that I don't mean guesswork, pretending we can know what Alasdair Gray would have wanted, or reducing him to a set of beliefs. In Gray's case, that's too reductive. What drove him was doubt and the search for knowledge, not the dogmatic fortification of opinion. True reflection is considering what can be learned from the life and works of those no longer with us. We learn not only from Gray's works, but in the way he lived his life. Mr. Gray stipulated he should have no funeral. He wanted no fuss. Who knows what he might have made of this debate? This behaviour goes beyond the humble nature of a preternatural talent. It's telling that in my conversations with his collaborators and supporters, I found that the first line of each eulogy does not mention the artistic achievements. Remember him as a man whose kindness had few peers. He treated his collaborators with respect, often paying them more than he earned. His grace was not an impersonation. If a mask rarely slips in the course of a lifetime, Gray wrote, then it's likely because it's not a mask at all. He believed himself the equal of anyone and was unafraid to assert that, but also thought himself better than no one. Gray wrote many times that he was a product of his time and his community in Ridley. He had been provided encouragement and opportunity and believed that everyone has a right to aspire. Through his example, Gray elevated a new generation to follow in his compassionate conduct, his artistic bravery to see the world anew, and his internationalist approach that gleams the mundane for universal truths. Alasdair Gray's works will live long, and Scotland is richer for it. But we should reflect on the democratiser that created this work. One could not have existed without the other, and if we truly remember Alasdair Gray, we should seek to hold his principle in highest regard. That triumph in artistic vision can only be understood as a product of the man who made it and did so much to help others have a vision of their own.
Thank you very much. I call Adam Tompkins, to be followed by Linda Fabiani. Mr Tompkins.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Thank you for squeezing me in. I think I might be the only person that Alasdair ever co-wrote a book with. And that person became a Tory MSP, I think, is something that shocked Alasdair even more than it shocked me. But our book, as Sandra White and Patrick Harvie have both kindly mentioned, was called How We Should Rule Ourselves. And if it worked because there was a creative tension in that second word of the title, the we. For Alasdair, it was a book about Scotland, and for his co-author, it was a book about the United Kingdom, as Rog Glass makes clear in his brilliant biography of Alasdair Gray, if any of you have read it. Rog worked for Alasdair at the time that he and I were collaborating on that book, and there's a long passage in that book talking about the making of How We Should Rule Ourselves. And he says that Alasdair wanted to write with me precisely because he knew that I didn't believe in Scottish independence. So the book is not about independence, it's not about socialism, it's about republicanism, actually. It's about a very particular strain of thought in republicanism, which has got nothing to do with the identity of the monarchy or the crown or getting rid of the Queen or any members of her family or anything like that. They do that by themselves. But the insight, as Patrick Harvie absolutely correctly identified, that government is accountable to us and not the other way around. And you certainly don't have to be in favour of independence to believe that. What you do have to be in favour of is localism. What you do have to be in favour of is the idea that government is something that should happen with us and for us, and not something that should happen to us. And that was the insight that we tried to give voice to in that book. Whether we were successful or not, I don't know, but the New Statesman certainly thought we were successful once. They published a list once of the 50 top read reads, the best books ever written from the left in the English language, and we made it in at number 48 on the list. Again, that's not something I told the party when I asked if I could be a candidate for the Conservative Party. My abiding memory, presiding officer, of working with Alasdair is his great unbridled sense of fun and mischief. That's my abiding memory, but if I'm honest, it is a great sense of fun and mischief that was often fueled by drink, and in particular by whiskey. I particularly remember sitting in his room, and he was very kind in giving me copies of his books. He was very proud of his books, but nothing like as proud of his books as he was of his paintings. He thought of himself very much as a painter first, and he wrote in this dedication to this book, to Alasdair from Adam, or was it the other way around? And I've got these two, he loved prefaces, and I have this wonderful copy of a book of his with both of these dedications, to Adam from Alasdair, to Alasdair from Adam, as if it mattered which of us had written the book and which of us was the collaborator that was in receipt of it. Sandra White asked if Alasdair Gray was a radical or a rascal. He was, of course, both. And he was not always lovable, even though he did have this great sense of mischief and fun, and he didn't always act like a national treasure. His essay on settlers and colonists was, in particular, I think, a profound mistake. But he was a genius. Let's not fall out on whether we agreed or disagreed with aspects of his political writing. We can all agree that he was a genius, a mad genius, perhaps, but he was, above all, a great Glaswegian. And it was, presiding officer, a real privilege to know him and to work with him. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Linda Fabiani. Ms Fabiani, please.
Thank you very much, presiding officer. I don't really know where to start. I was delighted when I read the motion that Sandra had put down, not just because it celebrated the life of Alasdair Gray, but because it's got asks in it that I think are really, really important, and I hope we all get behind that. I wasn't going to speak in this debate, as you know, presiding officer, but I managed to shift things round because I just felt very, very compelled. I had to say something because it's so very important. And I was sitting there trying to work out why I felt that way, and I think it's because Alasdair Gray, I just feel, has been part of most of my life. From the very first time I read any of his work, and it was short stories, it was a compilation of short stories that he'd written along with others. I think James Kelman was one in that anthology. The other one was Agnes Owens, who, can I just put on record, I think is one of the most underrated writers that Scotland has ever produced. And the man just fascinated me. So I wanted to talk about, because of that, because of Lanark. You know, as Claire said, I was a bit older than Claire when I purchased Lanark to read. But the fascination of the writing and the intellect, coupled with the artwork in the book, is another reason I wanted to talk about him. It's to celebrate that artwork, whether it be the public murals and, you know, Oran Moor and the Chip, fascinating, wonderful. But I actually have an Alasdair Gray print, and every time I look at it, I see something different, and I think different thoughts. It's a bit weird. It's one of his later ones. Yes.
Claire Adams.
I omitted to say in my own speech that I also have a piece of work from Alasdair. And as someone who's a lifelong rugby fan, it might surprise people to know I have a copy of the Celtic View, which he did a special edition for a few years ago. And he promised to sign it for me. Unfortunately, I never had an occasion in which that could happen.
Linda Fabiani.
She always got to go one better, eh? But that was one of the reasons I wanted to talk, because it's just to celebrate the absolute brilliance of the man, whether it be his writing, his intellect, you know, whether it be the artwork and the imagination behind it. I've always found him such a fascinating character. I didn't have the privilege of knowing him like Sandra and Claire did, though I did meet him once, and it's another thing I want to celebrate, is his absolute eccentricity. Oh my goodness, I remember it very well because I've got the fright of my life. I was at the Art Gallery, Kelvin Grove, for those who are not from Glasgow, the Art Gallery, and it was
it was a memoriam to Surjit Singh Chokar when they unveiled the bust of Surjit Singh Chokar. And I left the main part of the main hall for some reason, and I was walking away, and Alasdair Gray jumped out from behind a pillar and gave me the fright of my life. And I said, oh, Mr. Gray, what did you do that for? And he said, oh, you know me, how disappointing. And then we had a right good laugh, and he told me he was hiding from folk because he was fed up with people wanting to talk to him. And we had a really nice chat, and I've always cherished that memory. That sense of fun that you also saw in some of his work. Some of his work was very dark as well. And a couple of folk have mentioned that. Lanark was a very, very dark book. And I think that reflected Glasgow. And, you know, some of the context of Lanark, some of the quotes in it where he talks about Glasgow as a city that we hardly ever notice because nobody imagines living there, and contrasts it with other European capitals. Nobody visiting them for the first time as a stranger because they've visited them in paintings, novels, history books and films. Alasdair Gray has done some of that for Glasgow. He was part of that revival that gets talked about the City of Culture and Garden City. That was driven by our writers and our artists. And Alasdair Gray was very much at the forefront of that. So I see him well over time, and I should set a good example. So what I would say is thank you, Sandra. And I hope that the Cabinet Secretary will take seriously the request for that memoriam to Alasdair Gray. I hope the Parliament will take seriously the request that there be a work of Alasdair Gray celebrated here in this building, and celebrate Alasdair Gray and what wonderful memories he has left us, and Glasgow and Scotland has of him.
Thank you. I've given up on using first names as a deputy presiding officer. I was using first names right, left and centre. I knew you'd be surprised. I now call on Fiona Hislop to close for the Government. Cabinet Secretary, please.
Thank you very much. Perhaps we've just heard a speech about that was involved in breaking rules about a rule breaker, so I suspect that might be fitting. I'm also grateful to Sandra White for bringing forward this motion and securing the debate today. Can I also say I thought it was quite a brilliant tribute, and I thought there were really outstanding, beautiful speeches from across the chamber, and I particularly like the personal insights from Claire Adamson, from Linda Fabiani, as we've just heard, and also from Adam Tompkins. I'd also want to extend my condolences to Alasdair Gray's family and friends. The interest in this debate is testimony to the reach and depth of work by Alasdair Gray, whose creative output as an artist included poetry, plays, criticism, historical, political philosophy, painting, illustration, design, teaching and translation. And it's also testimony to the widespread sadness which exists in this place, as well as in communities across Scotland following the death of this maker of imagined objects, as he described himself. It's fitting that this Parliament remembers Alasdair Gray as one of the most influential Scots of the last 30 years and recognises his significant achievements that have influenced and shaped Scotland and beyond. Many in this debate have reflected the words which are inscribed on the Canongate wall of the Parliament: work as though you live in the early days of a better nation. Alasdair Gray lived by these words, often mentioning them in his own writing. He also acknowledged, as we've heard, that they were adapted from the words of a poem, Civil Elegies, by his fellow poet Dennis Lee, though they have often been ascribed to Gray himself. And the Canongate wall words are still relevant today, and perhaps even more so than when he first brought them to our attention. And as he made clear during his life, Alasdair Gray's wish for Scotland was for it to be an independent country. And while everyone here may not share that view, our focus now is on how we remember the man, his considerable work across the full spectrum of his artistic endeavours as an artist he was, and our collective wish for all this to be celebrated. As I'm sure a number of members did too, I had the enormous pleasure of meeting Alasdair Gray a number of times. The title of today's debate, Alasdair Gray, A Creative Force, is apt for this most stellar artist. He was a force of nature who carried with him an intensity of purpose in all that he did. and his idiosyncrasy was part of his genius. One tribute has, I noticed, described him as, and I quote, an eccentric, mischievous, occasionally prickly figure, which I think is very apt. His individuality and creativity shone through in all his activities. And Alasdair Gray also expressed his opinions, which occasionally led to controversy. And it's a reminder that artists help us all to see the world from new perspectives and in different ways. His achievements also highlight the incredible strength of modern Scottish culture. Nobody has done more to enhance the international reputation of Scottish culture in the last few decades than Alasdair Gray, one of the towering figures of contemporary Scottish literature and art. The stunning mural in Moor, to mention just one, demonstrate his outstanding skills as a painter. And as a writer, novels such as Lanark, Poor Things, and The Fall of Kelvin Walker, a fable of the 60s, are genuine landmarks of world fiction during the last 30 years. Startling, challenging, otherworldly, but also this-worldly. As with all artists, their legacy is their work, as that will live on and shine brightly well into the future. As others have said, Alasdair Gray's work is characterised by experimentation of form and shape, which led to work at once instantly familiar, but also unexpected. He combined written word and visual image to form memorable epic narratives. And he brought Glasgow into stark focus in his work, the place he loved so much. He received the inaugural Saltire Lifetime Achievement Award as recently as November 2019, a fitting confirmation of his legacy. And that award recognised Alasdair Gray's rich and experimental Scottish writing, as well as an impressive body of illustration, visual art and design. And in the coming months, it is right that we collectively take time to reflect, to remember and to celebrate the work of Alasdair Gray in consultation with the wishes of his family. Commemorations are important times for us to consider and reflect on people and events that have a profound impact on shaping our lives, our history, our country, and to consider their legacy. The Scottish Government supports all efforts to commemorate Alasdair Gray, and will look to our national and other cultural organisations to consider marking his work in their future work programmes. This could make many different forms, and I encourage organisations to think creatively about a suitably broad and diverse response to his life. It will also be important for the wishes of the family to be considered in shaping these opportunities. It is still early days, but I know that plans are already under consideration in many organisations. So far, Creative Scotland have published an article on their website entitled Remembering Alasdair Gray, which assesses his contributions to visual art and literature. I'm delighted to see that the National Library of Scotland is working with Glasgow Life by sponsoring an event at this year's I Write Festival in March, where a number of his contemporaries will discuss his legacy. I also understand that the National Galleries of Scotland, along with a range of other organisations, are considering how they may mark his huge contribution to the art world. Glasgow Print Studio, as we've heard, will be staging a new exhibition of his work, which runs from February to April 2020, entitled Alasdair Gray Omnium Gatherum, very appropriate. It will include new and never-before-seen works that will sit alongside existing prints made at the studio. And I'm also aware that Historic Environment Scotland have been asked to consider Alasdair Gray's mural on plaster at the Community Centre door in Palastrig in Cumbernauld for listing. On securing the future of Alasdair Gray's work, the National Library of Scotland already holds part of Alasdair Gray's archive, and there'll be discussions going on with a number of organisations about future plans, which I look forward to hearing more about once those plans are agreed and announced, and we'll all share an interest in how this unfolds. So Alasdair Gray has left a remarkable legacy for us today, and of course I will meet with Sandra White and interested parties to discuss suggested ideas in tribute to him. I congratulate everyone who took part in the debate this afternoon. I think we can look forward to a rich and varied programme to remember the extraordinary legacy that Alasdair Gray has left us to preserve and continue to enjoy. I think the world, Scotland, are so much richer for the contribution of such a remarkable man.
Thank you very much. That concludes the debate. I close this meeting of Parliament.